Welcome to Start By Listening, the podcast about sexual harm and trauma.
We are centered on educating and empowering our Western Kentucky communities.
Our goal is to transform the way we talk about sexual harm and trauma.
Transformation begins by listening to understand.
We talk so you can listen today and change the world tomorrow. Well, welcome back to another Start By Listening. Hope you guys are having a beautiful fall here in Kentucky. It is lovely this past week. We have a very, spicy cast here today. Some amazing women who work at New Beginnings and who also did some interesting work prior to coming to New Beginnings. And so I am so excited today to introduce some of my favorite people. And they're going to tell you a little bit about who they are. And our topic for today is going to be a little spicy. Raising sexual offenders, or something along those lines. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to these amazing ladies, and they're going to introduce themselves today. Who wants to go first?
Yo, I'll go first. My name is Becky Roby. I'm the clinical coordinator at New Beginnings. Been here a while, and previously I worked with juveniles who had been convicted of sexual offenses in my past life. So I'm pretty excited to be on this podcast. I think it's good information. I think it's things that people are not thinking about. There needs to be more proactivity in terms of this topic, because we are definitely raising and will be raising sex offenders. Scary shit. So I think it needs to be put out there and it needs to be discussed.
I'll go. I'm Crystal, and I'm a therapist at New Beginnings. Before I started working at New Beginnings, I was actually working at a juvenile sex offender agent sort of facility. And I've read the book stopitnow.org, which is also a really good book about preventing raising sex offenders. So, anyways, I got a lot of information for that. Glad to be here.
Yay, exciting.
I can go. My name is Tara, and I'm a therapist at New Beginnings as well, and I've been here for quite a while. Prior to working at New Beginnings, I was trained and did work with juvenile sex offenders. So the information that I learned then was very beneficial coming over to an agency and then working with victims of sexual abuse. So glad to be on this morning.
Oh my gosh. So did all three of you work at the same agency?
Becky and I did.
I worked at Owensboro Treatment Center.
Oh, I remember that.
Yeah.
Tara and Crystal, you guys did a course on being able to do therapy with juveniles, identifying patterns. I did not have that training. When I was working with this on what we actually called the sex offender unit, which isn't the most therapeutic title for a unit. And to clarify, juveniles who have been charged with sex offenses, because they cannot be referred to as sex offenders because they are not 18 years of age. So there was a lot of even political talk regarding juveniles who have charges of sexual offenses, and the different, you could not label them as sex offenders, and rightly so, because they're not 18. So
did you only work with people who were actually charged, or also perps who were referred for treatment? Was this specifically treatment if they were referred, or did they have to have the charges for you to be able to work with them?
They had to have the charges. So they had a DJJ worker and they had to have been charged and then court ordered to treatment. And then treatment there usually lasts about over a year.
Yeah, over a year. And they were lower functioning individuals.
Mm-hmm.
And I worked at a facility where, they were charged and placed there. It was like a detention center, and it was usually a year there too. And it was a it was a lot of different types of kids. It was all males.
What about you, Becky and Tara? Did you only work with males, or did you have any females that you all worked with?
It was
Juvenile
an
sex?
all male. It was an all male unit.
I don't think at that time, I don't think there was enough population for females. That would be really interesting research.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that would be like, if there were, like, where would they go for treatment, and
I feel
how do
like
you
there was,
provide that?
I feel like there might be one place back then to go, but I'd have to research it and because it's been 1998 is when I started there. So long time ago.
So you all started there, and now you're here on the other side, right? The perpetration versus the survivorship. I don't know. Let's just get into it. What's the one thing that you really wanted to bring today that you want our listeners to know? Oh, Becky's like, oh,
I think there's too much. I think at the time that I was working on the sex offender unit, I couldn't even have imagined what things would be like now in terms of tablets, cell phone use, unsupervised social media exposure. I mean, I can remember when I was a kid and I saw my first Playboy, and it was a magazine. And I was, I don't know, 12, 13, 14. And it was like, oh, I know what that is. I've heard about it. There wasn't like, oh, the curiosity of the body. What does another anatomy look like? But back when we were working with these juveniles, I couldn't have even imagined that even the title raising sex offenders, it means a whole new meaning in this time, this era, and this time of kids being unsupervised, of watching shows that are not appropriate, watching pornography, thinking that certain things that they do watch is what love and sex look like. I mean, I could just go on and on. And
Being groomed on the internet.
yeah. Oh, yeah. Being groomed on the internet. And all these things are being glamorized and normalized, and,
It grows. They are smarter than the police, than the FBI, than these sex offenders just keep changing online and changing their ways they say pictures and meet up. And yeah, it's scary.
just
I
the
think
thought in general about raising the sex offenders is if someone is exposed to content in a young period and they don't and haven't had any education, and it is fostered, and there's attention and there is sensations following, whether it's just viewing the porn or interacting with another kid, then we're just getting kid on kid sexual abuse. And then that kid's going to go and be experimental with another child, and so on and so forth. We have a very big concerning issue on our hands that will not get better until things are restructured. Parents feel comfortable talking to their kids about bodies and monitoring and supervision. And I'm going to be very dismal and tell you that this is disheartening for me, because a greater the population, I feel like, do not do that than actively do.
Here's a question that I have. So sexual abuse just kind of started being reported probably about the 70s, 80s, 90s. And we have guidelines on what is appropriate age sexual behavior. But how do we have those guidelines when we're not sure who's been sexual abused, who hasn't told, how many people in the past didn't tell, and all this has gotten passed down? How do we know what sexually appropriate behaviors are for children for real? I don't know if we can know that. If this just started coming out, and there's been so many times in the past where perpetrators have perpetrated on people way before it started coming out, and it was probably worse than it is now as far as privacy and keeping it private. And I don't know. I just thought about that yesterday, thinking about this, and it's like, how do we even have guidelines?
That's a good question.
Hmm.
Tara, I think you had something that you were getting ready to say.
I think coming to New Beginnings, it was very interesting to see how much education is very much the same. Like everything that I learned going through the juvenile sex offender program was very much in correlation with the same education that I provided victims at New Beginnings. Like when you're working with sex offenders, they have to identify ways in which they crossed boundaries, they desensitized, they groomed their victims. You have to process what they did to their victims, their feelings. And then on the flip side, working with victims, you have to help them identify ways in which they were groomed, their boundaries were tested. And so the education is very, very similar when working with both populations.
Wow. I never stopped to think about that, but I've never worked on the other side. So that is really interesting. It's almost, what's the word? The inverse kind of knowledge, right?
Hmm.
Wow. And back then, was there any kind of restorative justice practices between perpetrators and survivors? Was that even a thing?
Mm.
Yes. I mean, but the way I witnessed it, I didn't know for sure if it was restorative justice. Did y'all have to do the committing offense, and then they had to read the committing offense to their parents and to sometimes the victim if it was a sibling?
Yeah,
Or
they had to do
group.
it group. They had to start in group. They had to read their offense in group. Well, they had to do it in therapy, then they had to do it in group, and then they had to keep moving forward and do it like in family therapy and to the victim. And
Oh my God,
How
that,
effective.
yeah.
Could you imagine being the sibling that had to sit through this
How
person?
traumatizing, right?
You're sitting here, and I swear to God, I'm probably going to get a lot of flack for this from someone, but it kind of sounds like trauma focused CBT.
Just add the perpetrator. Yeah.
Oh my God.
and that's still very much a practice. I mean, to my knowledge, when they're doing reunification between siblings, still I know at New Beginnings we can't directly work on, sex offender behaviors, but in my other job, I do come across it too still as well. And that's still a practice that they do, is that they have to discuss these offenses in front of their family and the siblings to do reunification.
When we were working there, Tara, I don't recall if the focus was ever on making sure the family had the victim in treatment and that someone prepared them for what was going to happen in these sessions, because I don't feel like the therapist, because I was not an active, I was in school, master's school, when I was working on the unit. So I was not a therapist. I was not a licensed therapist at that time, but I did do groups and I did work individually with the offenders. And as far as I can remember, there was not a comprehensive approach.
I don't remember that being something that we discussed or a topic. Even, I have to be honest, and Crystal, you may have a better memory. Even going through the training, I don't know if we really focused on victims and the help that they were receiving, or to make sure that they were.
I don't remember that.
I don't remember that.
But you know what? We sure as hell do it on this end. When we know that a perpetrator is in treatment, we are the first ones that are to get a release for the treatment center to make sure, are they incorporating the victim? And I think that was probably subconsciously when we started working with victims. It's like, wait, we can't do this work. They can't do that work without the victim, and the victim has to be ready. And a lot of times it's more focused on if the perp is ready. Have they labeled all their offenses? Have they went through every single offense? Are they ready to read it out loud? Can they say the words? I feel like the focus was there, and then on the flip side, we're very much like, wait, and it's
Does the
not.
victim even want to do it? I'm sure children just are like, I guess, I do whatever I got to do.
Or are the offenders going to a step down treatment program before they go home? There's a lot of questions that were out there, and those are the things that you focus on when you have a victim whose perpetrator is family, that's in treatment. You want to do a full comprehensive approach. You want to know, is this going down? How's this person doing? I need a timeline. Or have they even admitted to their offenses?
We also had mixed types of offenders. Y'all probably did too, because it wasn't a huge program. But like I'd have a kid who committed sexual assault on a peer, and then in the same group, you'd have a kid that sexually assaulted a child. And to me, that is not the same thing. Like if you may be sexually attracted to children, that's different to me than raping somebody your peer or older, or like somebody raped their mom in my program. So those are totally
very different
ways to approach things. But if we're going to talk about raising actual sex offenders, the thing that I read this book probably 20 years ago, and it stuck in my mind, and it still does, and nothing's changed really. But what they talk about, so I copied off a piece of paper, a form off their site, not a form, an information handout thing. And it's 15 questions about your thoughts and behaviors that only you can answer. And they're all about, do you have sexual attraction to children or underage teenagers? It's all about your thoughts and what your sexual preferences are as far as kids. And they talk about, we don't do prevention. We do tertiary, I think that's what the word is, tertiary prevention, where the kids are just supposed to tell whenever they feel uncomfortable. So where they come from is you talk to your kids about being sexually attracted to children. They have a hotline you can call and talk about your sexual fantasies to see if they are appropriate or not. Like if you're feeling weird about it, they've actually got a service you can message and talk about those. I feel like that's real prevention from raising a sex offender, is actually talking to your kids about sex, period, and then talking to them that it is real, that people have sexual attraction for children. We're not sure how that happens. We don't know if it's genetic. We don't know if it's, well, that book talks about you can even get accidentally attracted to children in certain situations. And so that's the prevention, really. And we are not doing that. And I don't mean we as an agency. I mean, we as a society are not talking to your kids about that.
Well, I have fur babies. I don't have two-legged babies. But in what world, is there a class to help parents understand? I'm just thinking, oh my God, I don't want to laugh because it hurts, but I'm thinking about when my mom sat me down at the table at age 9 and brought out the puberty book and talked about sex and vaginas and penises. And she didn't use the word orgasm, but sperm and how babies get made. That was pretty badass for 1982, 83.
Yeah, way more than I did.
But I can't imagine my mom sitting down at a kitchen table with me and saying, okay, Jennifer, we're going to talk about this word called pedophilia. And if you have any fantasies or how do you even, do you also even go with this? How do you get comfortable to have that level of a conversation with a child? And how do you make it age appropriate?
I don't know, but we need to figure that out at marketing.
Oh my God. Holy shit.
Figure out how to market it.
Yeah, because think about it. That's why sex offenders continue the behavior for so long. They're not addressing it as a kid. They're too ashamed and embarrassed, the stigma. There's not a place I tell people all the time, say you have substance abuse issues, you can go to any type of treatment program and say, this is what I'm struggling with, or I'm struggling with this. There is no place that you can say, I'm struggling with these deviant thoughts without the risk of being charged, without the risk of, so normally they're not getting into treatment until, they are caught or they are charged, because they're not coming forth and sharing this information. And the saddest part is, a lot of it is sexual abuse within the home. You have two siblings, and that to me is just heartbreaking in general, because I see so many parents who then have to struggle with that, because their other child who was the offender is going to come back home. That is their child. They do love them. It can't be, because people are like, once somebody commits this crime, how could you ever look at them? How could you ever love them? We should shame them. We should do this. That also is their child, and you have to do reunification. You have to. So, I mean, there's a time period where I see, like, the siblings, while they're going through treatment, one is staying in one home, one is staying in another home, or one is off to treatment facility, but eventually they do have to live underneath the same roof again.
So I'm hearing like prevention is key, education is key to all of this, but how effective were you seeing treatment before that reunification? Like, do you think the treatment that all of y'all were using back then, was it effective? Did these perps go on to perp again? And has treatment changed over the last X amount of years since you guys have been working with offenders?
So, Shelby, even thinking that treatment working is only dependent on the person you're working with, because the thoughts never go away. So it's whether you act on them or not. So if I'm driving down the road and I have road rage, the thought whether to punch that person out at the stoplight versus actually doing it, and that's where the key is. And we also know, and Crystal and Tara, please correct me if I'm wrong, it has to do mostly with opportunity.
So, I mean, that's where you just have to implement safety, like alarms on doors, doors locked, cameras, different things like that, because I think that's where that was the hardest thing for me. I think there was a big realization, you're going through the sex offender training and you're working with these offenders, and, you're doing all this work, and they didn't really talk about that these tactics may not work, that these people the chance of them reoffending is like 99%, like they didn't really give those statistics. You're thinking like, I'm doing all this good, and then coming to New Beginnings and you're seeing, the statistics of, no, these people reoffend. This is why we have a sex offender registry. This is why we have, all these things put in place, because they do reoffend. And then I've had so many victims tell me, like, what's the point in doing a victim impact statement? What's the point in doing this? Because they're just going to reoffend. They're just going to continue to do this. So it's like Becky said, how do you just teach them that? And then how are they honest and say, I've gone through treatment and I've gone through all of this, and now 5 years, are they going to go to somebody and say these thoughts are still occurring?
Yeah, because it's not a very open and welcoming situation. And I also think sex offending is on a spectrum. And I do think there are people who are attracted to children that do not act on it. And I don't know how they do that. And I don't know how we find them to find out how they do that. But I do believe that they're out there. But there's nowhere for them to come forward either. It's just not, until we made sexual abuse okay to talk about, which it's still not 100%, but if we're talking specifically about our area, in 1998, we had 5 clients a week. Now we have, I don't even know, we have 100 clients a week, maybe coming in and out. And so that's not because people started sex offending more. That's because people feel comfortable telling and talking about it. But there was a time when nobody talked about it ever.
I still think the numbers could increase too, just based on desensitization, based on social media, based on the normalization of Which
So with, sorry,
It's just
No.
new crimes. Yeah, yeah.
but Becky, so with that exposure to these things, are we saying that people who offend, like it's because they were exposed at such a young age and they became desensitized and now they're just going to be offenders forever and they can never change that because those thoughts are always going to be there? So we have to prevent it before it happens. Does that mean just anyone can be a sexual offender if they were exposed to the wrong
yes.
stuff at a young
Yes.
age?
So when we
That's
say
a scary
raising
thought.
offenders,
Mm-hmm.
it's exactly it. It's twofold. It could be like Crystal is saying, there's like this organic attraction to kids, or the organic attraction to not being able to identify vulnerable populations and just wanting to engage in sexual activity. And then it is a learned behavior that could be created due to exposure. And some of the trainings that we went to, and the what is the lady's name that we used the content and she did the sex offender treatment program in Oregon? Do y'all remember off the top of your heads?
She died. Jane Hyman? Or was it the other one? She's dead. Jane Hyman was the one that did the lie detector tests about when they come to therapy to see if they were offending.
Was it Kavanaugh?
Yeah, Tony Kavanaugh Johnson was the one we brought here, and she did
Okay.
I was thinking, I'll have to look it up. We use the pamphlet, the predator pamphlet that we give out to parents, the secondary non-offending parents, to help them to see grooming techniques. She's one particular person in this video and this training that we watched sticks out to me. And he said he remembers it very clearly. It started with like pantsing and pulling his pants down and thinking it was funny. And he got more attention from it, from just the pantsing. And he could remember, he identified that as there's like a memory that they can associate with when you're able to identify when you realized that things had changed. And his was, I remember they thought it was funny. And then I just kept escalating with my behaviors until here I am. I'm an offender. And I was just like, holy shit.
I remember one of the examples that they used in my training was, a child was at school and the teacher disciplined him, like did something, and the child was very angry, and then, very, very angry at the teacher for what they had done. But then also maybe the teacher they were attracted to for some reason. And then later at night, they're at home and they're in their room and it's private. And so they begin to masturbate. They're angry, they masturbate, and they also think of the teacher in a sexual way. So then you're grouping the feeling of anger along with this sexual attraction. Then they're masturbating, then they ejaculate. And
it's so complicated.
But see, when does it cross from like deviant sexual behavior, but it's a kink and it's consensual and you're having that conversation with your partner, to like going and straight out being an offender? Is that like something in your brain that causes that?
You don't think about it with your partner. Well, I mean, I think
that's what makes you an offender, but
right.
Deep down, like what is that like line that you cross where you are, this is consensual, this is deviant, but like it's what I'm into because I was exposed to some weird crap as a child, to I'm going to harm other people without their consent.
Power and control, lack of empathy, lack of compassion for others, no regard for consequences.
Growing up in a home where you're emotionally neglected, when you're physically abused, I mean, being treated that way can mix up all kinds of things for people and what they use for comfort. And yeah.
And I can honestly say, working with some of the offenders that I've worked with, they did think it was a consensual relationship because they had groomed so well. Like they had groomed so well, and the victim didn't say no. And then you have a younger victim too, who this is very confusing because it does feel good to my body. So they're not necessarily saying no and screaming and crying, even though they don't want it done. So a lot of the offenders I worked with truly felt like this was a consensual thing. So then that's very confusing for them.
Adults do too.
Yeah, so that was, I mean, and then you're working with some offenders who have a low IQ, so that's a hard thing to address with them when they thought it's very confusing for them. They knew it was wrong, but then a part of them thought it was right, and then it's like, how do you reteach and rewire some of these thought processes that they were having? But they justify. I've had there. It's all justified.
Yeah.
You probably saw that too, Becky. Like, it's all justified.
Well,
Yeah.
especially with adults, and they have things on the internet that can confirm their beliefs of man and boy love. It's appropriate. It's something we should all have, just like other people have rights. They can get confirmed in their beliefs online.
So I just had a thought. I had two thoughts. Number one, we need to do a podcast on deviant sexual behavior versus kink and trauma. What do y'all think about that?
Now they're starting to use kink in treatment.
So that's something interesting. I think that's versus sexual offending. Do you see how, like, you got three, like, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Then I had a second thought of, what if we do a part 2 with you all? Because I think we just kind of scratched the surface. Would you all, would the three of you all be willing to do a part 2 on this topic of raising sex offenders? Because Shelby asked some great questions about like, how effective is treatment? What's the recidivism rate? Restorative justice 20 years ago versus restorative justice now. I don't know. Would you all be willing to come back and do a part 2?
Sure.
Yeah, but I think there's also a lot of I don't knows that follow some of those questions.
Absolutely.
Such a complicated.
And yeah, but I don't know is okay because we're starting the conversation and people are listening and thinking about things they may not have thought about before.
Bingo.
And I do think there's a spectrums, like Crystal was saying. And when Jennifer approached us with this podcast, my brain seems to be stuck on, because I do have 2 small children, of how we are raising sex offenders because of the lack of supervision, how social media is a babysitter. And at what point do parents sit down and talk about what a consensual sexual relationship looks like? When we have teenagers who are coming into our office who are telling us that they lost their virginity to their boyfriend and it was consensual, and he, I'm just going to use quotes of words verbatim that clients have told me, when he jizzed on my face or he made me swallow his cum, and we talk about, okay, how's your thoughts about that? Do you feel like that is what other sexual relationships look like and sound like? Yes, absolutely. That's what boys do. They disrespect. I mean, in my head, I'm thinking, oh, we've got a lot of education to do, because it's normalized based on the fact that these kids are watching porn at a very young age. Sorry about the beep. My coffee maker is telling me that it's no longer brewing warm coffee and it's shutting off.
You hear it.
So it's those moments when you know, wow, parents need to wake up.
And the type of parenting that's being done.
Guardians need to wake up.
Yeah.
And you got grandparents raising kids because of substance abuse. They going to have that conversation? Hell no. They're not. Do they?
And
probably
how many
generational trauma? Absolutely.
And what you said, Becky, and how many missed opportunities happen because parents are uncomfortable to have the conversations? Like, I have 3 kids, and with all of them growing up, as a toddler at a very young age, there has been something with all 3 of them that has came up that they had no idea was inappropriate. Whether I walked through the house naked, or I did this, or I said this word, or I did this, where I have to stop in that moment and say, wait a minute, and do some type of education where so many missed opportunities where it could have taken place but we don't because we're afraid and we don't know what to say. And then it's kind of like, oh my gosh, just something. We immediately go to something must have happened to my kid. So we go there versus let me just educate them on. Yes.
But they're triggered by their own trauma and can't talk about it.
Yeah. So as a parent, a lot of times we go to, oh my gosh, did something happen to them because they just did this or they used this word or they said this versus, okay, I just need to address this because they're curious and this is their body, or they overheard something or they saw something, and doing that education in that moment. Because I mean, as a parent, it's happened with all three of mine. There has been 100% been a situation, if not more than once, where I'm like, oh, wait a minute, come here. Let's talk about that. Like, what was that?
Perfect.
Well, hey guys, this has been absolutely amazing. I want to be respectful of Crystal's time because she has to get off of here. But we had a really heavy conversation today, and I'm so excited for part 2. We have a couple minutes. Let's do like 2 or 3 rapid fire questions. Get to know you fun. Let's like shake the energy out, right? Take this heaviness.
I feel cheap.
And I'm sorry, you got to save it for part 2, Becky, but let us know. I got a question. First question, Becky, Tara, Crystal, go in that order. If you could have any superpower in the world, what would it be?
Time machine.
First.
Time machine.
Am I new?
Go for it.
Yeah, you go.
Flying all day long.
I would say flying, but then I'm scared of heights. I think I'd want to be like superhuman, like super power strength and climb and do whatever. Being invisible is kind of creepy. You don't want to be creeping,
Yeah, I'm the same. Unless I'm going in a bank.
Yeah.
Okay. Next question. What is the one gadget you cannot live without?
One gadget I can't live without?
It could be anything.
Yeah, anything.
Well, I'm OCD and everybody knows this, so it's going to have to be like my floor cleaner or my vacuum. I used to tell people like, I really like you if I say I love you more than I love my vacuum.
Didn't know that about you. I love that now. I think I'm going to look for a vacuum Christmas ornament for you this year.
Yeah, like if I love you more than I love my vacuum.
Gadget. It's not a gadget, but my first thought was my vehicle.
Gadget. I mean, it's got stuff in there that's beyond sticks and stones. So yeah,
actually the first thought that came in my head was a pair of scissors for some reason because you said gadget, and I was like, wait, I can completely live without my pair of scissors.
Mine is phone. I mean, yeah.
Yeah, me too, girl.
What is your ice cream flavor? Favorite ice cream flavor?
Banana.
I'm very eclectic on flavors, so I'll go with vanilla, but I mix a lot of stuff in that. It's hard to pick.
Anything chocolate with brownies, anything in it.
Awesome. Ladies, wow. I mean, I love you all. I've loved you all for 5 years now. Six this month coming up. But thank you for saying yes, as always. We appreciate your time. And boy, today has been just interesting, like spicy and thought-provoking. The best ever. Wow. Just great. So just want to say to all of our listeners out there, you can change the world tomorrow just by starting and listening today. Stay frosty, and we'll see you for part 2.
Yay!
Well, we've made it to the end of our episode. We want to thank you for listening. We hope you'll take something you heard today and use it to change the world tomorrow. We wanted to thank our music producer, Seth Hedges, from Uriah Wild Media. His website is in the show description. Also, a big shout out to Rodney Newton, our technical advisor.
See you next time. This project was supported by grant number VOCA 2020 Green River 26, awarded through the Kentucky Justice and Public Safety Cabinet by the U.S. Department of Justice. The opinions, findings, conclusions, and recommendations expressed in this program are those of the authors and do not necessarily reflect the views of the Kentucky Justice and Public Safety Cabinet or the U.S. Department of Justice. Thank you.